Good morning. My name is Chandler. I'm an alumnus of Westminster class of 1961. Though it's been 55 years since I graduated, I still remember sitting where you were sitting in the pews. Seems a little strange to be up here. The significance of many of the things you will experience today will have little meaning for many years, but some will turn out to be transformative. You're not aware of how impactful this high school experience is because you are focused on the here and now. But later in life, whether in college or beyond, the lessons you learn here will become the building blocks of your life. My life at Westminster impacted my eventual decision to commit my life work to social justice through preserving physical places and stories to tell history. These places and stories are the story of a man called Venture Smith, a West African slave who became a free man in the Connecticut colony in 1765. In the summer of 1960, I attended a math institute held here with a classmate, Jimmy Evans. Since we were both from Westminster, it seemed natural for us to decide to room together that summer. This decision turned out to cause family problems for me. My parents were okay with it. My grandmother, who paid my tuition, was not. Jimmy was black, and she could not understand that Westminster would allow Jimmy and me to room together. She was the same person who in 1950 had my brother and me spend the summer with her and her sister in Blacksburg, Virginia. Our cousin owned the local theater at the time. Because Blacksburg was part of the segregated South, white patrons were supposed to sit in the main seats in the front of the theater. My brother and I, who were around 6 or 7 years old, were not popular because we did not adhere to these rules. On our first Saturday in town, my brother and I went to see a Western and we sat in the balcony seats. Meanwhile, Jimmy and I thoroughly enjoyed one another's company in our dorm room, and we learned a great deal of math, which would help me later at Wesleyan. In 1963 at Wesleyan University, I met people who became significant influences on my adult life. Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, my teacher and coach, Pastor William Spurrier, and the musician and social activist Pete Seeger. All of these lessons went unused for many years. But much later, in the early 2000s, I was asked to develop a program to save a number of buildings and home sites here in Connecticut associated with the former slave Venture Smith. In order to understand this man, I look back to the experiences I learned while on the Hill and then at Wesleyan. If we were to save and interpret these places, I needed to get into the head of Venture. As I began to understand him, I saw how much Connecticut society still was a land of steady habits where white privilege still matters. But I also saw that Venture's written narrative and the places he lived and worked offered a rare opportunity to take up the cause of racial equality. This opportunity provided me with a chance to use what I had learned on the Hill and to do something with this accumulated understanding, lessons and study that I believe truly matters. The exhibit at the History Wing of Armour Academic Center, and the story I'm here to tell you about, is the story of an African born in 1729, enslaved, but who died a free man in Connecticut in 1805. The story of Venture Smith is actually the much bigger and more important story of the continuing quest for racial equality for all. I am a historic preservationist. I save buildings and historic sites to tell our history, and I hope to use Venture's story in these buildings to make some social change. 11 years ago, I joined Professor David Richardson, the founder and first director of the Wilberforce Institute for the Study of Slavery and Emancipation at the University of Hull in the UK, to start the documenting Venture Smith project. Through his narrative, Venture Smith estimated that he was born in Uingar in West Africa in January 1729 as Brotur Furo, eldest son of Sogman Furo, in a small kingdom near what is today the Lake Chad area of northern Cameroon, Nigeria, and Chad. Unfortunately, this area is better known today as the headquarters of Boko Haram. Venture's father was the king or leader of the tribe. Thus, Venture would have had tutors from age 2 on, and he would have been raised to be the next ruler. As a result, by age 10 or 11, when he was captured, he would have been well educated and received the passage to adulthood. In 1738-39, the kingdom was attacked and wiped out by a jihad. 275 years later, the same thing is being repeated there. During the raid on his village, Venture was captured and marched over 1,000 miles to the small city of Anamabu on the Gold Coast of Africa, now Ghana, in the spring of 1739. He was sold to the steward, Robinson Mumford, in the spring of Mumford of the Rhode Island slave ship, the Charming Susanna. For perspective, in 1762 at Anamabu Fort, from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, every hour, more than one African was sold and forced to take the Middle Passage west as a slave. Venture spent his first year as a British colonial slave in Newport, Rhode Island, then went to live and work on Fisher's Island in Long Island Sound, which was at that time a plantation growing the foodstuffs to feed the slaves in Barbados and Jamaica. By the year 1754, Venture had grown into a giant of a man, 6 feet 1½ inches and nearly 300 pounds. He married another slave, Margette. They had a child, and then Venture unsuccessfully tried to run away from Fisher's Island to build a free life. At the end of 1754, the family was split up when Venture was sold to Thomas Stanton of Stonington Point, Connecticut. Later, Stanton did buy Venture's wife and daughter, only to split them up again 3 years later. For Venture, 1759-1760 was the turning point in his life. He was pawned for a year to Daniel Edwards in Hartford, Connecticut, again separated from his family. Daniel was a lawyer, Queen's appointment to the upper house of the colonial legislature, probate judge of Hartford, Connecticut, financial advisor to Governor Trumbull, and a member of the colonial Supreme Court. Further, he had one of the finest homes and houses in Hartford, which contained significantly for Venture a large library. For a number of reasons, we believe Daniel Edwards taught Venture to read, and he then challenged Venture to build a life for himself and his family. In 1760, Venture returned to Stonington and was sold for the last time to Oliver Smith, who needed to build a house, a store, a boat works on Stonington Point. Oliver contracted with Venture to allow him to regain his freedom. It took Venture, by buying it, it took Venture 5 years, working part-time to pay for himself. And in April 1765, he regained the freedom he had lost 26 years earlier in an African war. Venture then spent the next 9 years working to amass enough money to free his wife and children. By 1765, he had bought each member of his family, and they lived as a free family. But with the Revolutionary War overtaking Long Island, Venture joined the Patriots and fled to East Haven on the Connecticut River. His son Cuff served in the Continental Army for 3 years, and his son Solomon served in the War of 1812. While the war continued around him, Venture made his mark as a farmer, fisherman, and trader of commodities in East Haddam, Connecticut. Bought to New England as a traded commodity and named Venture for that transaction, it is ironic that he would make his fortune and decide his family's future as a trader in commodities. In 1805, at the age of 76, Venture was buried as a peer of his community in First Church Cemetery, East Haddam, in a formal family plot. He chose a prominent location where everyone who came to the church and the cemetery would see his final resting place. Venture is buried with Meg, his wife of 50 years, his son Solomon, and 3 grandchildren, lying finally at rest under a magnificent tombstone he designed, crafted by John Isham, the leading stone carver in the area. The tombstone is one of the first public monuments to the British Atlantic slave trade and to those that resisted, survived, and overcame slavery in its inscriptions, sacred to the memory of Venture Smith. An African, though the son of a king, he was kidnapped and sold as a slave, but by his industry he acquired money to purchase his freedom, who died September 19, 1805, in the 77th year of his age. Venture is one of the few survivors of the Middle Passage who left a written record and more physical places than any other survivor in the Western Hemisphere. This narrative is the earliest known work of African American literature. He is the iconic story of the Atlantic world slavery. He achieved the American dream by becoming a self-made man and a respected member of the elite in his community. He was brought to New England as a traded commodity, but he went on to free himself and his entire family, and then helped found the country, along with John Adams, George Washington, and Benjamin Franklin. Except, unlike the faces of the men we think of today as the founding fathers, Venture was a black man. In the 18th century, Venture and Oliver Smith, his last owner, figured out how to put the terms owned and owner aside in order to live and work together. They were able to create this very unusual and ideal relationship because they saw each other as individuals who could trust each other and work together, not as black or white, but as human beings. The trust between the former slave Venture and his owner, Oliver Smith, enabled them to do business together, and this trust extended into their families. Venture's son Solomon, in 1815, named his son after the former owner of his father and the founder of the country, George Oliver Washington Smith, and the name carried down for many generations. As my late friend Pete Seeger, American folk singer and social activist, said, this extraordinary problem, which sooner or later the entire world has to face up to, how people of very different ethnic backgrounds can learn to live together on this earth. Don't mean they have to live right on top of each other, but they have to treat each other decently. The experiences I had at Westminster, the teachers I worked with, and my relationship with my classmates all helped to create the person I am today, and the passion that I have for this project. I have dedicated my life both to Venture Smith's story and working to preserve the past. We are trying to get Venture's farms and tombstones declared UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Please take the time to look through the panels on the third floor of Armor on the walls of the History Wing. They tell this important story of Venture Smith's journey, a journey so many other African slaves like him were also forced to take. It is remarkable to have the account of Venture's life, and I urge you to listen to his narrative at some point. It's also ironic that the most documented 18th century American slave never went south of Long Island. Thank you.